Lashana Tova. 2,000 years ago, the temple was destroyed. Historically, the Romans destroyed the temple and laid waste to Jerusalem. But tradition teaches us that the Jewish community was divided, and there was internecine strife, baseless hatred for one another, called sinat chinam. Its origins is found in the book of Leviticus. Lo tisna et achicha bevavecha, chochiach tochiach et amitecha, velo tisav alav chet. You shall not hate your sibling in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17. The Romans took advantage of the divisions and polarization among the factions of the Jews living in Eretz Israel at that time. And while people were fighting with one another, humiliating one group over another, the Romans destroyed their way of life. They scattered the Jews to the four corners of the earth, and it would be 2,000 years before a sovereign Jewish nation would rise again, and then only through the vision of a secular Viennese Jew named Theodor Herzl, who was able to bring together the tremendously factionalized Jewish community at the end of the 19th century, and then the destruction of the 6 million Jews before the Jewish community could actually find the ability to work together to create a Jewish democratic state. I was reminded of that when Tehila Friedman, a new minister of Knesset, gave her inaugural speech in the Knesset on August 14th, 2020. In MK's inaugural speech is usually a time for them to introduce themselves, to share their vision, to make unobjectionable statements. MK Friedman took a different path. She's a native of Jerusalem, and her father was a paratrooper who helped to liberate Jerusalem in 1967. An Orthodox woman who decided to stand up in the leadership of her country and her people. She said, "My opening speech may very well be my closing speech," Friedman noted in her remarks, as the continuing budget crisis threatened to send the country to yet a fourth election in 19 months. Begging her listeners' forgiveness, she asked to say something different. She began, "Over the past few weeks since I arrived in this house, I haven't stopped thinking about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the most important Jews in history, who at the last moment managed to escape Jerusalem and to rescue the Jewish people out of Jerusalem and its burning temple, and to move to Yavna and its unifying academy, and to invent it all anew. I think of that leader who lived in Jerusalem in the midst of a terrible civil war, while outside the Romans stood and waited for the right moment to enter and to destroy everything. The Civil War began because of an argument about how to deal with the Romans, but quickly turned to a war of identity, a war of all against all. What you think about the Romans, about what the Romans became or who you were, and if as I disagreed with you, I was against you. Utterly onto bloodshed it went. Hate washed over everything in that time. In the name of hate, knives were drawn at the Holy Temple. In the name of hate, grain silos were set on fire that could have fed a city under siege. In the name of hate came hunger, and with hunger came despair. Now, Tehila Friedman wrote, in the midst of a crisis of enormous proportions, we find ourselves again in a frightening place. A deadly plague runs wild outside, and within the same destructive desire to defeat one another, the same blindness and folly, the same malignant hate that makes us invest most of our energies on the internal fight. As in that time, the silos of trust are set on fire. The political institutions are made to crumble, endangering with mind-numbing irresponsibility the very existence of a shared home. The coronavirus didn't dampen the division, Friedman warned. In the middle of this coronavirus period, in a health crisis and an economic crisis and a social crisis unlike any we've known before, in a crisis of governance after a year and a half of deadlock, without an approved budget and facing a painful deficit and a recession, there are again those who want to take hold of each other's vestments, to fight, to again tear at one another, to once again take every societal wound and scar and rub it until it bleeds again, to once again mock and ridicule the pain of others. Tehillah Friedman's words are true of Israel, and just as true of our country as well. Like her, I'm also frightened by the rhetoric and the attacks and the inability for us to be civil and respectful to one another, especially when we have different viewpoints. Our world has become us versus them. The questions are no longer how do we find a creative solution to meet the majority of our needs and their needs. It is how do we hurt them before they hurt us? How do we hate them more than they hate us? And we no longer believe we are right. We know we are right. And they are wrong. In the spring, Eagles wide receiver Deshaun Jackson tweeted an anti-Semitic statement. And before the electrons could truly cross the internet, many responded that he should be fired from the Eagles. That was my first reaction as well. I don't want that person and his viewpoints to be on my Eagles football team. But after a few hours, a 94-year-old Edward Mossberg, a Holocaust survivor, who serves as the honorary chair of an organization called From the Depths, which is dedicated to preserving the history of the Holocaust and what happened to 6 million Jews, invited Deshaun Jackson to go with him on a tour of Auschwitz. Jackson accepted the invitation. At just about the same time, Julian Edelman, a player on the New England Patriots, invited Deshaun Jackson on a joint tour of the United States Holocaust Museum and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, both in Washington, D.C. And in that moment, I realized I had succumbed to the us versus them. And I wanted to hurt Deshaun Jackson in the same way his tweet hurt me. I had forgotten Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17. You shall not hate your siblings in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. We are not supposed to hate one another. And when we offer a rebuke to someone, we are to do it in a loving way which will not humiliate the other. I fell into the same trap as many. It was us versus them, when it should have been ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. And from Pirkei Avot, hu hacham, mihu hacham, who is wise, one who learns from all people. As it is written in Psalms, I have gained understanding from all my teachers. Over the last few years, I have had the privilege of getting to know Karen Downer, the head of the Bucks County NAACP. We have stood together at a variety of public events, including the Black Lives Matter drive-through vigil held at the Garden of Reflection last spring. At the end of July, she called me upset because of Rodney Muhammad, the leader of the Philadelphia NAACP, had tweeted out anti-Semitic remarks. And those remarks, while immediately condemned by many in the community, including Karen, she saw an incredible backlash to his remarks. And that traditional supporters of the NAACP here in Bucks County, had said to her that they might have to pull back from their support because the NAACP, based on his remarks, didn't represent their beliefs. During our conversation together, we both recognized that we were making assumptions about each other's community. We made assumptions about how much we knew about each other, and in fact, Karen and I realized that we knew much less than we actually thought. And we agreed that we need to start learning more from one another instead of making assumptions. We recognized that we each have a bias. We recognized that to be allies, we must take responsibility for listening more, for learning more, and for talking more about the issues that are before us. It is now a necessity, more than ever, that we of differing races, of faiths, and backgrounds take the time to bring people together instead of pushing them apart. This is exactly what happened to the people of the Second Temple times. They fought with each other, and Rome came in and destroyed their lives and their communities. We have legitimate, tangible, significant differences in our worlds. So for a moment, I would like everyone to listen closely to what I'm going to say. Over this summer, I have spent a lot of time reading, talking, and thinking. And I have come to believe that the concept of Black Lives Matter is not about just black people. It's about highlighting the biases that so many of us have toward other groups. Leave the politics at the door for just a moment. We can agree on the following. I, Aaron Gaber, will never know what it means to carry a baby to full term because I am not a biological woman. Because my skin is not black, I will never know the racism that a black person may face. And God willing, I will never know what it means to be pulled over for no other reason than the color of my skin. Just in the same way, as a heterosexual male in a heterosexual relationship, I will never really know what it means to be gender fluid or gender queer, because I'm not that. And I will never know what it means to take Jesus into my heart, because I'm a strong believer in Judaism. But that doesn't mean I can't learn. It doesn't mean I can't enter into conversations with others. It means I can listen to others, and I can learn from others. I can also recognize that because of who I am, I may have biases which are part of who I am as a thinking, feeling human being, created in the divine image of God. We were endowed with the ability to think and to reason because our role on earth is to preserve the earth and all it contains for future generations. My friends, today, we will hear the familiar words and melodies of the Unatana Tokef. The verse, U'shofar gadol yitzaka v'kol demama daka yishama. The great shofar is sounded, and it is a still small voice that is heard. It is always poignant to me, because it is a reminder that in the midst of great noise, a small voice continues to remind me of what is right and just in this world. The liturgy goes on to teach, even the angels are dismayed. In fear and trembling they cry out. The day of judgment has arrived, for even the heavenly hosts sense they are judged, and know that they are not without fault. On this day, all of us pass before you, God, one by one like a flock of sheep. As a shepherd counts sheep, marking each of them pass under the staff. So you review every living being, measuring the years and decreeing the destiny of every creature. Our world faces significant issues: pandemic, economic, recession, hunger, other diseases, bigotry, hatred, and hatred that comes in so many different forms. Our way should start with Leviticus. You shall not hate your sibling in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. Our way should love our siblings. And when we say something offensive, unkind, and downright insulting, we should not, and when someone says something offensive, unkind, and downright insulting, we should not hate them, but we should educate them and open our hands in friendship. We do not resolve these issues by retreating into our tribal unit. Instead, by opening our hand to the needing and of loving others as we would have them love us, and by treating each person as if they are created in God's image, we can make a difference. It's not easy for people to have a conversation together. We know we have biases. We know that a progressive Democrat views the world differently from a Trump Republican. And I'm not naive enough to think that we can resolve these issues in a manner that will get everyone everything they want. But this is the time for us to think to ourselves that we have biases. How do those biases affect my worldview? Can I ask myself, does that comment infer bias towards another? Can I be explicit enough to say to the person across from me that I am who I am, and my viewpoint is shaped by those experiences, those beliefs, and those values? And can that person say the same about their position? And then can the two of us acknowledge those differences without rancor and insult? And then can you start a conversation from there? To me, this is the first step. As Mickey Scout B. Jones, an author and speaker, director of healing and resiliency at the Southern-based Faith Matters Network, wrote, "Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds in this space. We seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think, and what we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side." Ken Mickey Ratzon. May we all work together side by side to bring this world together, to preserve it for the future, and to create a sense of peace and companionship with one another. Ken Mickey Ratzon. May it be your will, God. Lishana Tova.